The cycle repeats itself. Reality never stopped testing you. You just didn't realize that everything follows a rhythm. It's not about luck. It's not about talent. It's about understanding a force that almost no one sees, but that shapes everything, absolutely everything around you. Some people live in endless cycles, relationships that fall apart at the same point, crises that return with a new name, emotions that spin in circles, even when life seems to move forward. You feel like you're making progress, but suddenly you find yourself in the same place again, as if you were stuck in a dance you didn't choose, yet still dictates your steps. This dance has a rhythm, and that rhythm has a source. It's the law of rhythm, a forgotten principle that governs the tides, the emotions, the thoughts, the phases of your life. While you ignore it, it drags you along, but once you awaken, it becomes the soundtrack of your freedom. Hermes Trismegistus taught, everything moves like a pendulum, and Thoth, guardian of this knowledge, didn't try to stop the pendulum. He found the point of balance between the extremes, the space where the noise fades and clarity is born. There, time doesn't demand haste, it reveals rhythm. There, the swing ceases to be a threat and becomes a language. In this video, you'll understand why everything that goes up must come down, and how to stop suffering from it. How to stabilize your frequency so you're no longer ruled by life's ups and downs. And what Thoth knew about the power point between one cycle and the next. You're not stagnant. You're in constant motion. The difference lies in who knows where they're going, and who keeps spinning in place, thinking they're moving forward. But not all progress is visible at first glance. Many of the greatest leaps in consciousness begin in silence, in retreat, in the descending curve that comes before the rise. The mistake is in believing that progress only exists when there's speed. But there are rhythms so subtle that only those who've learned to observe not just the world, but their own internal field can perceive them. The law of rhythm teaches that everything pulses, nothing stays fixed, not even what seems solid. Mountains wear down, civilizations rise and collapse, blood flows, the breath goes in and out, and every thought you have, even the most repetitive one, is part of a rhythm that must be listened to, not just corrected. But most people react to movement as if it were an enemy. They fight to stay high and resist the lows. They want stability, but forget that life, by nature, vibrates. And where there is vibration, there is a cycle, a tide, a curve. To not recognize this flow is like trying to hold air in your lungs and calling it balance. It's unnatural and, over time, unsustainable. Thoth, in his wisdom, never tried to stay at the top. He understood that every point on the curve had a purpose: growth, contraction, collapse, and rebirth, and that those who learn to honor each stage begin to move with awareness, not out of reaction. Have you noticed how certain emotional patterns return like waves? A sadness that seemed to overcome but returns. A doubt that resurfaces. An energy that fluctuates. This isn't weakness. It's the echo of a rhythm that hasn't yet been integrated. Because as long as you only want the upward side, the movement will always be forced, and the return inevitable. But when you accept the nature of the curve, something changes. You no longer descend in fear. You descend prepared. You know there's wisdom in the retreat. That silence comes before sound. That the seed dies in the soil before breaking through the ground. This is the point where the oscillation loses its power to throw you off balance, because you stop resisting the cycle and start using the cycle to your advantage. Notice The universe is not punishing you when something dissolves. It's returning you to the point of reconstruction, a point that isn't the end, it's a restart. And when that happens, you no longer spin in place. You begin to spiral. Each turn takes you to a higher level, more lucid, more intentional. The rhythm continues. But now, it's you who leads the step. And when consciousness awakens, a new kind of sensitivity emerges. You start to notice things that used to go unnoticed. Small signs, subtle energy shifts, moments that seem insignificant, but carry within them the seed of a greater change. It's in this refinement of perception that true mastery is born, not through control, but through presence. Because there's a moment, there always is, when everything seems to slow down, even if only on the inside. And it's in that pause that a new possibility is revealed. A decision, a non-reaction, a moment of silence between a stimulus and the automatic response. This is where the universe tests your vibrational maturity. When everything in you wants to respond, justify, rush, prove, but a quiet part chooses only to observe, to wait, to feel, without being swallowed by the oscillation. This is the space where reality begins to reorganize. Thoth knew that higher intelligence doesn't manifest in noise, but in the pause between the noises. Wisdom doesn't lie in the excess of thoughts, but in the space between them. Just like music doesn't exist only in the notes, but also in the rhythm between them. This space, which seems empty, is what makes everything possible, and it can't be forced. It only reveals itself to those who are truly attentive. The mistake most people make is thinking that evolution is accumulation. More knowledge, more action, more achievements. But consciousness isn't measured by quantity, it's measured by depth. And depth requires pause. Pause is not absence, it is stored power. It is the field being reordered before manifesting something new. But we live in a culture that rejects pauses, that confuses silence with weakness, that treats waiting as defeat. And so, we live exhausted, trying to create stability within a mindset that only values doing. But Thoth taught something different, that there is wisdom in waiting, strength in listening, power in knowing when not to act. This is the most forgotten point of the law of rhythm, because it's not just about recognizing movement, it's about knowing how to inhabit the pauses with awareness. That's where oscillation loses the power to destabilize you, because it keeps happening, but you no longer dissolve with it. You observe, you align, and you respond, only when necessary. This is the beginning of true energetic mastery, and when this point is reached, something profound is revealed. Cycles don't disappear, but they begin to replicate your inner coherence. It is no longer reality that dictates the flow of your experience, but your frequency that reorganizes the way it manifests. It's subtle at first, almost imperceptibly. Small reactions change. Certain triggers lose their strength. Situations that once would knock you down now simply pass through you, like wind through a tree that has learned how to root itself. This rooting doesn't come from rigidity, but from listening, because every field vibrates and every field communicates. Emotional instability doesn't come from nowhere. It arises because you stopped hearing the whisper and only reacted to the scream. Thoth didn't master the invisible through magic. He created enough silence to notice when the frequency began to shift. He knew how to distinguish when an emotion was just a residue of an old cycle, or the sign of a real turning point. And, above all, he recognized that not every change required a reaction. That takes training, attention, refinement. But above all, it requires that you stop seeking balance as a fixed point. Real balance is not stillness. It's conscious adaptation. It's adjusting your step according to the terrain without losing your center. You can go through turbulent days without losing yourself. You can move through phases of withdrawal without fading. You can even face external instability without it creating internal instability. And when that distinction begins to take place, time changes too. Life is no longer a sequence of repetitions. It starts to reveal intelligence behind each wave. You stop living in the "why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this cycle showing me now?" This shift in perspective is liberating, because you no longer feel at the mercy of the rhythm, but in dialogue with it. You don't try to rush time nor freeze it. You align, and in that alignment, reality ceases to be a constant struggle to keep everything under control, and becomes a field of response between what you vibrate and what the universe gives back to you. There's no more urgency, only perception. And with perception, clarity is born. With clarity, lightness is born. And with lightness, you move. Maybe this is exactly the step that was missing. Moving without tension, without hurry, and without trying to force results before their time. Because, as long as you insist on controlling the cycles, everything around you hardens. Things slow down, get stuck, resist. But when you begin to flow with time, instead of fighting against it, the paths reveal themselves. Not all at once, but enough to keep going. This is where the law of rhythm reveals its most subtle dimension. It's not just about recognizing that everything oscillates. It's about learning to inhabit the space between one phase and another with awareness. Most people live in excess of urgency, of expectation, of noise. They jump from one state to another without honoring the transition. And it's exactly in that abrupt jump that patterns repeat. Thoth taught that every cycle has an end, but the end is never immediate. There's a passage field, a moment between the death of one frequency and the birth of another. And those who neglect this threshold end up recreating the old within the new. They bring the same energy into different situations. They attract new scenarios with the same vibration that no longer serves them. This is the most common mistake of those who awaken, knowing they need to change, but not knowing how to sustain the change. Because changing the external is quick. Cutting ties, starting projects, distancing from people. But if the vibration doesn't change, everything comes back. It's in this space between cycles that you need to refine yourself. Not through effort, but through presence. Not with haste, but with listening. Listening to your own field. Feeling what is still vibrating there that no longer aligns with what you want to live. That takes honesty and courage. Because sometimes, what you want the most is exactly what's keeping you from reaching the next phase. You hold on, you cling, you insist, but the frequency has already expired. And no matter how much the mind tries to hold on, the universe responds to rhythm, not to will. That's why it's not about fighting against or speeding up the process. It's about recognizing where you are within the cycle and allowing what needs to end without attachment, without illusion, without drama. There's a silent dignity in letting something go when its time has passed. And it's precisely in that empty space between what has left and what hasn't yet arrived that your energy reorganizes itself. That's where the frequency is born that will attract the new reality. But only if you don't rush it. Only if you don't fill that space with anxiety disguised as productivity. This interval is fertile, but only if it's respected. It's the point where the ancient alchemists operated, between what has died and what is being reborn, between absence and form, between the end of what you no longer are and the beginning of what is still forming. There is no hurry there, only pulse, only listening, and it's at this subtle point that the field begins to listen back to you. And when that happens, something changes in the very structure of experience. You realize the universe was never silent. It was you who needed to slow down enough to hear it. The law of rhythm then stops being an abstract concept and becomes a tool for real transformation. Because by recognizing your own cycles, you stop treating yourself as someone flawed and start treating yourself as someone in process. Not every day will be high frequency. Not every phase will be expansive. But if you understand the tide, you don't sink, you sail. This is the point where the content stops being merely informative and becomes alchemical. Because you can use this knowledge to adjust your habits, recognize your emotional patterns, let go of what no longer matches your current moment, and, above all, stop sabotaging yourself every time life asks for a pause. There is wisdom in knowing when to move forward, but there is even more strength in knowing when to wait with awareness. Hermes Trismegistus expressed this clearly. Time is the key. Everything comes in its time. The maturing of a soul happens in the silence of the cycles, not in the haste of desires. Maybe you don't need to change everything right now. Maybe you just need to align, because when the frequency changes, destiny changes. Life doesn't respond to what you want. It responds to how you vibrate between one desire and another. If this message resonated with you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. This helps this wisdom reach more people. In the comments, write, "I breathe in the rhythm of creation." Share this video with someone who needs to remember that even chaos has a rhythm. Click the screen to watch previous episodes in the series on the Hermetic laws. Remember, reality only responds with clarity when you learn to walk in the right time.